Today I want to talk about older games and how brutally difficult they felt. I think this memory is so common that it almost has become part of gaming culture itself. We talk about old console games like they were built to punish us, and in some cases they were, but the interesting part is that many older games were not always mechanically harder than what players deal with now. In many situations, they simply asked different things from us. The challenge often came less from complex systems or advanced enemy behavior, and more from how little room these games gave you to recover from mistakes. A missed jump, a wrong turn, or one bad decision could erase several minutes of progress, and that changes how difficulty feels, even if the mechanics are actually pretty simple. And that's not to say that modern games don't contain difficult mechanics, but they often soften how failure is delivered. We get checkpoints, clear feedback, adjustable difficulty, and systems that quietly help progress continue. Older games usually did not offer these comforts. The result is that even when modern games are mechanically more demanding, older games often remain remembered as harsher experiences because they framed failure in a much more unforgiving way. So let's talk about why older games feel harder than they truly were. I think one of the biggest reasons older games felt difficult was the simple fact that progress was fragile. In many early console games, saving either did not exist or was extremely limited. You might spend 20 or 30 minutes getting through a level only to lose everything because of one mistake near the end. That does not necessarily mean the level itself was more technically difficult, but it meant every action carried more pressure because failure had immediate consequences. Games like Super Mario Bros. And Contra became famous partly because players had to repeat large portions of them over and over until muscle memory took on. Arcade influence played a major role here too. Early home games borrowed heavily from arcade design, where repetition was part of the business model. In an arcade, difficulty encouraged players to spend more money. At home, that same philosophy remained, even though the player was no longer feeding coins into a machine. Many games were short, but they became memorable because players had to replay early sections constantly before seeing later content. A game like Ghosts and Goblins is remembered as extremely punishing, partly because the player had almost no margin for error and had to repeat sections constantly. Even when save systems arrived, they were often restrictive. Password systems were common, but they were not always convenient. Some passwords returned players to specific stages without preserving resources, upgrades, or exact progress. That meant progress existed, but it still felt incomplete. A game like Mega Man 2 let you continue, but mistakes still mattered because each stage demanded consistency and resources were limited. Modern games usually avoid this kind of pressure. Frequent autosaves and checkpoints change the emotional weight of failure. In a current game, dying often means losing less than a minute of progress. In older games, dying could mean replaying entire stages, and that repetition creates a memory of harshness that often lasts longer than the actual mechanics themselves. Older games also gave us very little direct explanation. Tutorials were minimal, and many mechanics had to be understood through trial and error. Sometimes the instruction manual carried important information that modern players never even see when revisiting old titles through digital releases. Without that outside explanation, you had to study enemy behavior, test items, and learn systems through failure. This is one reason games like Legend of Zelda felt mysterious and difficult. The world offered freedom, but it also gave very little guidance. You had to experiment, remember locations, and sometimes discover secrets through just pure curiosity. A hidden bombable wall or a random path through a forest could stop progress for long stretches, not because combat was hard, but because the game expected patience and observation. Role-playing games also handled information very differently. In older RPGs, mechanics were often hidden behind vague numbers or unclear systems. Games like the original Final Fantasy gave little explanation for stat growth, elemental weaknesses, or encounter planning. Players often learned through mistakes, which made success feel harder earned even when the underlying systems were not extremely complex. Modern design usually reduces that uncertainty. Objectives are marked clearly, mechanics are explained immediately, and systems often reveal their logic through interface design. Older games often expected players to sit with uncertainty much longer, and that uncertainty is a huge part of why they are remembered as difficult. But many older games created difficulty not through enemy intelligence or complex systems or lack of direction, but through punishment after failure. Losing lives, losing resources, restarting far from progress, or repeating bosses after long level segments all made games feel severe. A platformer like Castlevania is a great example. Enemy patterns are consistent and learnable, but the punishment for mistakes is harsh because knockback can send players into pits, and recovery points are limited. The design teaches caution because every mistake carries visible cost. Fighting games and action games often work the same way. In a game like Ninja Gaiden, difficulty is remembered not only because enemies are aggressive, but because mistakes can quickly spiral into major losses. Yet once patterns are understood, much of the game becomes a rhythm and anticipation rather than impossible challenge. The live system added another layer to this pressure. Even when you understood a level, the idea of limited attempts changed how failure felt emotionally. A game like Donkey Kong Country often remains manageable once learned, but losing progress repeatedly creates stress that makes each jump feel heavier than it actually is. Modern games often separate challenge from punishment more carefully. A hard boss may still exist, but repeated attempts usually begin quickly. Older games often made players replay the path to the challenge, and that repeated lead-up intensified the memory of difficulty. I think one of the biggest reasons that these games feel harder in memory is that we often forget how much time we spent playing them. Many games became manageable only because we repeated them constantly over weeks or months. That repetition eventually became invisible in our memories, leaving only the idea that the game itself was extremely difficult. A game like Super Mario Bros. 3 becomes dramatically easier once level structure is understood, but that understanding originally came from repeated exposure. We learned hidden blocks, enemy placement, and timing through constant play. What now looks simple was once built through many failures. This was especially true because we owned fewer games. A single cartridge might be played for months, meaning we naturally mastered systems through repetition. Today we move between many games quickly, which changed how difficulty is experienced. A hard game now competes for attention in a different way than it did decades ago. Older action games also depended heavily on memorization. A game like R-Type is not just about reflexes, it's about knowing what comes next. Enemies appear in exact patterns, meaning the game becomes easier only after repetition teaches those patterns. That's why revisiting old games today often creates surprise. They can still be hard, but they are often more readable than memory suggests. The challenge was real, but much of it came from repetition, patience, and familiarity rather than impossible design. Older games earn their reputation for difficulty, but that reputation is often tied to how they delivered failure rather than pure mechanical challenge. Limited saves, unclear systems, strong punishment, and repeated practice all combined to make ordinary mechanics feel much harsher. The jump did not become harder because it required advanced skill, it became harder because missing it meant replaying everything before it. Modern games often still contain deep challenge, but they usually separate difficulty from frustration more carefully. Players are allowed to fail without losing as much time, and that changes how challenge is remembered. A modern difficult game often wants the player to improve quickly, while an older game often expects the player to endure repetition until improvement happened naturally. That difference is why older games still occupy such a strong place in our memories. They ask players to commit attention in a way that many modern systems no longer require. Even when the mechanics were simple, the emotional weight of failure made them feel enormous. In the end, older games were not always harder in absolute terms. They simply made every mistake matter more, and that feeling has stayed with us for decades. Hey, thank you as always for taking time out of your day to spend it with me and watch this video. I truly appreciate you. If you're new here, maybe think about going down, clicking the subscribe button, the like button, and ringing that notification bell if you want more videos like this in the future. As always, thank you to our members, Ahead of the Curve, Notch Johnson, Bogwater Cryptid, Michael Roberts, Wafflecopter, Fourth in a Dynasty, and Little Schizomaster. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye.